The night had a silence that was not peace, but the kind that follows screams. Smoke coiled upward into a starless sky, black plumes that blotted out the moon. A cabin that once carried laughter, and the smell of cornbread now hissed and crackled as flames ate its bones. Her breath rasped through her cracked lips, shallow and uneven, each exhale a ghost of the strength she had once carried. She crawled through the ashes, bare feet blistered by hot embers, her dress torn and heavy with blood. Somewhere in that roar of fire and smoke lay the body of the man she had promised forever to, sprawled across the dirt with his shirt darkened by the final wound. Her boy had screamed until his voice broke into sobs, and then even that was stolen when rough hands dragged him away into the night. She had run after them, wild, but fists met her body and boots pressed her face into the ground. They left her gasping, ribs aching, and when she lifted her head again, the hoofbeats of their horses faded into the wilderness, carrying her son where she could not follow. Now only the coyotes sang, distant and cruel, their howls carried on the wind like a mockery of her loss. She pressed her cheek against the soil, warm with lingering fire, and whispered her boy's name as if the earth itself could carry it to him. Tears streaked the soot on her skin. She had no more strength left. The fire chewed through what had been her home. The night wind tugged at her hair, and she wished the flames would take her too, alone in the prairie's endless dark. She felt her soul curling into itself, collapsing under the weight of grief. Dawn came like a wound splitting the horizon. The first light was bruised purple, then streaked with scarlet as if the sky itself bled for her. Frost clung to the tall grass, each blade sparkling cold as the world inhaled a breath that smelled of smoke and pine. She staggered upright, her knees shaking, the taste of iron on her tongue. Her husband's rifle still lay where it had fallen, its barrel blackened from the fire. She bent slowly, fingers trembling, and lifted it, though it felt heavier than memory, heavier than any hope. She clutched it close, though she had no plan beyond holding it until her strength gave out. The prairie stretched out around her, an endless sea of silence. In the far distance, a line of dark trees marked the forest's edge, sharp against the pale light. For a moment she thought she saw a movement among them, a shadow shifting. But when she blinked it was gone. She let herself sink back onto the scorched earth, curling around a rifle like a child might hold a toy. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, but sleep came jagged, laced with images of her boy crying for her. Reaching out his hands pulled him away. It was the sound of boots on frozen ground that woke her. Slow, deliberate steps. She stiffened, clutching the rifle to her chest. Her breath caught, throat raw, heart hammering against her ribs. The footsteps came closer, crunching over frost and ash. Through the veil of smoke and weak morning light, a figure emerged from a line of trees. He was taller than any man she had known, shoulders broad beneath a coat of ruff fur lined with age and wear. His hair was long, black streaked with silver, falling in damp ropes against his chest. A beard shadowed his face, but the scars beneath it told of knives and claws that had tried to cut him down and failed. He moved with the silence of predator, but his eyes, pale, sharp as steel, watched her with something she had not seen in hours, something she had nearly forgotten existed: regard. She scrambled backward, lifting the rifle though her arms shook under its weight. "Stay away," she rasped, voice cracked from smoke and screams. He stopped a few paces from her, lowering his hands slowly to show they carried no weapon in reach. His gaze swept the ruins of the cabin, the body lying motionless near the doorway, then returned to her. He did not speak right away, only let the silence stretch until it settled heavy as stone. Finally his voice came, low, rough like gravel worn smooth by years of solitude. "They did this to you?" Her throat closed, tears burning fresh, and she could only nod once, her jaw trembling. He knelt then, easing his tall frame lower until he was nearer her level, his movement steady, unhurried. From inside his coat, he pulled a strip of cloth, torn from some older garment, and held it out to her. "You're bleeding," he said. Her grip tightened on the rifle, mistrust battling the hollow need for help. She studied his hands, scarred, weather-cracked, the nails rimmed with dirt, but they did not reach for her. They only offered. Finally she let the rifle slide to her lap and took the cloth. Her fingers brushed his, callous and warm, and she flinched at the unfamiliar touch. He did not press further. He only leaned back on his heels, eyes never leaving her face. After a long moment, he spoke again, softer this time. "A boy. I saw tracks heading north with riders. Was he yours?" Her breath broke into a sob as she nodded. "My son, 9 years old." "They—" She could not finish. Something passed over his expression then, something like memory sharpened into rage. His jaw tightened, the muscles in his neck corded, and for an instant he looked carved from stone, fury contained in stillness. When he finally spoke, each word carried the weight of a vow. "They will regret it." The words hung between them, heavy, final. She stared at him, searching for cruelty or deception, but found only the kind of certainty that frightened her more than the outlaws had. She wrapped the cloth around her cut, her fingers clumsy, and when she faltered, he reached forward and tightened the knot for her with surprising gentleness. The wind picked up, scattering ash through the grass. Crows circled above, their cries harsh against the silence. He rose to his full height and scanned the horizon, his hand resting briefly on the hilt of the knife at his belt. She felt both smaller and safer under his shadow. "Why?" she asked hoarsely. "Why would you help me?" His eyes returned to hers, pale light catching in their depths. He considered before answering, as if testing the weight of honesty. "Because I know what it is to lose, and because a boy deserves a chance to be returned to his mother." Her lip trembled, and she pressed her fist against it to stop the sound that wanted to escape. For a moment she hated him for giving her a thread of hope when despair had already claimed her. Yet she could not look away. His presence was too solid, too real, as though the land itself had sent him from its forest to meet her at the edge of ruin. He moved past her then, stepping carefully over the scorched ground to the remains of the cabin. He crouched beside her husband's body and lowered his head, one large hand brushing ash from the man's shoulder. No words, no prayers, just a silence that carried more respect than any sermon. When he returned, she found her rifle in her lap again, her knuckles white around the stock. "You'll need this," he said simply. She looked down at it, at the weapon that had once belonged to a man she loved, and nodded faintly. Her hands stopped shaking. They spent the day among the ruins, gathering what little remained unburned. A tin cup, a few cartridges, a scorched blanket half salvageable. He worked with quiet efficiency, moving like a man who had long lived without the comfort of others. She followed his movements, noticing the way he checked every shadow, every sound in the wind, as if danger lingered in the edges of the world. As night fell again, the prairie darkened under thick clouds. Thunder muttered on the horizon, distant but drawing nearer. He built a small fire shielded by a wall of broken timbers, its glow flickering against the planes of his face. She sat across from him, knees drawn tight, her son's absence burning in every heartbeat. At last she spoke, voice raw. "They carved something into a tree before they left. A mark, like they wanted me to know they would come back." His head lifted, eyes narrowing. "Show me." She nodded, her body shivering though the fire was warm. Together they rose, the rifle cradled in her arms, and stepped into the darkness beyond the ruins. The night smelled of rain and charred pine. Lightning flared briefly, white and sudden, and in its flash she saw it. The crude symbol carved deep into the bark of lone oak, its lines jagged, malicious, a scar left a reminder she was never safe. Her breath caught. Fear pressed ice into her chest. He stepped closer, running his hand over the carving, and then turned back to her. His voice was calm, steady as a storm rolling toward them. "They want you afraid, broken, but we're not done here. Not yet." The sky grumbled above, the first drops of rain hissing against the fire they had left behind. She clutched the rifle tighter, her heart caught between terror and the fragile spark of something she thought had died with her husband. It was not hope, not yet, but it was a promise of movement, of not lying down to die. The thunder rolled louder, closer, and she lifted her eyes to the dark figure standing against the storm. And for the first time since the night her world ended, she did not feel entirely alone. The storm pressed down heavy that night, clouds rolling low over the prairie like dark water, swallowing the sky. Rain came in sharp bursts, needling skin, drumming against the remnants of the cabin. The fire hissed and sputtered beneath the makeshift shelter he had built from broken timbers, throwing unsteady light across her face. She sat close to the boy's rifle, hands wrapped around it as if warmth might pass through the wood. Across from her, he sharpened his knife with slow strokes, each scrape a whisper in the rain. The silence between them was not empty but weighted, thick with things unsaid. She studied him to the flicker of firelight. The scars on his arms, the way his eyes tracked every sound in the storm, the steadiness in him that seemed carved from stone. She wondered who he had been before the wilderness claimed him, before scars and solitude remade him into the shadow of a man. Yet she did not ask. His silence carried more truth than answers ever could. When the storm eased, he rose and motioned for her to follow. Together they walked to the tree where the symbol had been carved. Rain ran down the grooves, glistening like fresh wounds. He touched it once more, then turned north, gaze fixed on the horizon. "They went this way," he said. Her throat tightened. "You can follow them?" "I can," he answered simply. "But it won't be easy. They'll know we're coming. Men like that don't leave signs without reason." She clutched the rifle tighter. "Then let them know. I want my son back." For the first time, something flickered in his expression, a spark almost like approval. He gave a short nod, and with that, their journey began. The land stretched wide before them, cruel and indifferent. Grasslands bent beneath the weight of rain. Rivers swelled and rushed cold as bone. Days blurred into a harsh rhythm, walking until muscles screamed, pausing only when darkness forced them to rest. He taught her to read the ground. Broken twigs, hoof prints pressed deep into mud, the faint trail of smoke carried by the wind. She stumbled often, her body still bruised, but each time he caught her before she fell. At night, they made camp beneath trees or in hollows carved by time. He built small fires, careful to shield them from sight. She gathered kindling with trembling hands, learning by his quiet instruction how to listen for the forest secrets. The snap of a branch, the call of an owl, the silence that warned of danger. Around those fires, the distance between them began to shrink. She tended his wounds from the ambush that had left him limping, binding them with cloth torn from her dress. He flinched under her touch but did not pull away. One night, when the fire burned low and their breath mingled with the rising mist, she asked, "Why do you carry this fight? You owe me nothing." He stared into flames for a long time before answering, "Because once I had a boy too." His voice was low, cracked like old timber, and men like these took him, took everything. I never found him. Her chest tightened, and she reached across the narrow fire, her fingers brushing his hand where it rested on his knee. He did not move, but the firelight caught in his eyes, and for a moment she saw not just the strength but the wound beneath it. Their trail led them deeper into the pines, where shadows pooled and the air grew colder. It was there the first ambush came. The snap of branches was the only warning before bullets tore through the trees. He shoved her to the ground, the rifle clutched tight in her hands, as he fired back with ruthless precision. Smoke stung her eyes, ears ringing with gunfire. She lifted the rifle, heart pounding, and pulled the trigger. The recoil jolted her shoulder, but one of the shadows in the trees fell silent. When the last outlaw fled into the dark, silence returned in ragged gasps. Her chest heaved, her arms trembling, but the rifle was steady in her hands. He looked at her then, not as a victim, but as someone who had taken her first step into another life. "You did good," he said simply. They left one man alive, tied against a tree, his mouth bloodied. The stranger pressed his knife to the man's throat, voice low. "Where's the boy?" The outlaw spat blood, eyes wide with fear. "Camp by the river, 2 days north. They keep him close." The knife pressed deeper until the man whimpered. "Alive? Alive. Ain't touched him. They want her broken first." Her stomach turned, but relief burned through the fear. Her boy lived. That knowledge alone kept her feet moving when every muscle begged to rest. 2 days of relentless travel carried them into the shadow of a storm. Snow fell in restless flurries, stinging skin, blinding sight. They found shelter in a deserted barn, its roof sagging but walls strong enough to block the wind. Lantern light glowed soft against the wood, casting their shadows long. She sat close to her son's rifle, her breath visible in the cold, while he stitched a cut on his arm by lamplight, teeth clenched against the sting. She reached to steady his hand, her touch soft against his rough skin. "Let me?" she whispered. He hesitated, then handed her the needle. Her fingers worked clumsily at first, but a steady gaze gave her courage. When she finished, she tied the knot and sat back, eyes stinging not from smoke, but from something raw, something rising between them unspoken. He flexed his arm once, then gave her a small nod. "Haven't had someone patch me up in a long time. And I haven't had someone to fight beside me," she whispered. The storm howled around the barn, rattling its old bones. In that fragile quiet, they found something neither had expected. The beginning of trust, and beneath it, the first breath of something like love. Morning came cold and white. They moved silently through snow-dusted trees, their breaths clouding the air. The sound of water reached them first, the rush of a swollen river. Smoke rose beyond it, thin against the pale sky. His hand lifted, signaling caution. Together they crept closer, and the outlaw camp revealed itself. Rough tents pitched in a clearing, horses tethered, men gathered around fires with whiskey bottles in hand. At the center, tied to a post, was her boy. His hair hung in his face, his small body shivering, but his chest rose and fell. Alive, her knees nearly gave, but his hand steadied her shoulder. "Wait for the right moment," he murmured. The attack came with the fury of a storm. He moved like a shadow, knife flashing, pistol cracking through the chaos. She fired a rifle, her shots echoing across the camp, each one driven by fear and love. Men shouted, stumbled, fell. The boy cried out for her, and that sound carried her through the madness. She reached him, cutting his bonds with trembling hands. He fell against her, sobbing into her chest. "Mama," he gasped, "I knew you'd come." The outlaw who had taken her husband lunged from the shadows, blade raised. Without thinking, she drove the knife into his chest, her hand shaking as blood spilled hot across the snow. His eyes widened, then dimmed, and he collapsed at her feet. Her breath came ragged, the knife still clutched tight. For the first time since that night, she felt the weight of vengeance in her hands. The camp fell silent but for the crackle of fire and the river's roar. The last of the outlaws lay broken in the snow. He stood over their leader, bloody but unbowed, his chest heaving with the effort of battle. With one final strike, he ended it. Dawn crept over the trees, soft and golden, melting the snow into glittering streams. She held her boy close, rocking him as if to assure herself he was real. He clung to her with small fists, whispering through tears, "I thought I'd never see you again." She lifted her gaze to the stranger. His face was streaked with blood and smoke, but his eyes were steady, watching her not with pity, but with something deeper. Gratitude swelled in her chest, but words felt too small to carry it. He turned as if to leave, to vanish back into the wilderness that had shaped him. But she reached out, her voice breaking. "Don't go. Not yet." He paused, looking back at her, and for a long heartbeat, the only sound was the river. Then he nodded once, slow, as though granting himself permission. They left the ruined camp behind, the boy between them, the rifle slung across her shoulder. The land stretched wide before them, no less harsh, no less cruel, but no longer empty. By nightfall, when they camped beneath the stars, she lay awake listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, her boy safe in her arms. For the first time since fire consumed her home, the world did not feel like an ending. It felt like the first page of something new. And if you had been sitting by that fire with them, you might have felt it too, that spark in the ashes, that fragile truth the frontier always tried to bury. Out here, grief would take everything, but it could also carve a space for something else. Strength, redemption, even love. So remember this story when the nights feel long. She thought her world had burned to nothing, until a stranger from the mountains walked out of trees and proved that even in the darkest winter, hope can return.